I moved back home 3 days after the diagnosis. My father sat in his study when I arrived, fingers drumming against the armrest of his leather chair, the same chair where he'd reviewed my report cards, where he'd explained compound interest when I was 12, where he'd told me my college fund would be redirected toward more pressing family needs. The light through the window cut his face into geometric planes. He looked smaller than I remembered. "Vivian," he said, "you didn't have to come." I set my suitcase down in the hallway. "Of course I did." The house smelled like lemon polish and old paper. Nothing had changed since my last visit 2 Christmases ago. Same Persian rugs, same oil paintings of ancestors I'd never met, same massive oak dining table that seated 12, but usually held only my father's breakfast plate and newspaper. My mother's garden was visible through the French doors, overgrown now, roses tangling with weeds. My father had stage 4, pancreatic, cancer, 6 months, maybe 8. He told me over the phone in the same tone he used to discuss quarterly investment returns. Factual, measured, already processed. My sister Lydia had texted me the news 2 hours before he called. She was in Singapore. She'd be back when things got serious. I was 34 years old. I'd been living in Portland, working as a grants manager for an environmental nonprofit. My apartment had exposed brick and plants I actually kept alive. I'd been dating someone, nothing serious, but nice, normal. The kind of life where Sunday mornings involved coffee and the farmer's market, not medical appointments and morphine schedules. I gave notice at my job the next day. 2 weeks felt obscene, but my supervisor understood. "Family first," she said, squeezing my hand. The first month was almost peaceful. I established routines, morning medications at 8, breakfast, soft foods, nothing too acidic, physical therapy exercises to maintain muscle tone, afternoon rest, evening medications at 6, dinner at 7:30, whatever he could tolerate. I learned to read his pain levels by the set of his jaw, the way his breathing changed. I learned which pharmaceutical combinations worked and which made him nauseous. He was a difficult patient, proud. He'd built a commercial real estate empire from a single strip mall in 1983. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, sat on corporate boards, endowed university chairs. Now he needed help getting to the bathroom. "I can manage," he'd say, even as he gripped the walker. "I know you can," I'd reply. "But you don't have to." Lydia called twice a week, always apologizing for the time difference, always asking if I needed her to come back yet. She'd send information, articles about experimental treatments, names of specialists, supplements she'd heard about from a colleague's aunt. I'd thank her and file the information away. Her wedding was in 4 months. She was marrying a neurosurgeon. The venue was already booked. My brother Nathan visited every other weekend, driving up from San Francisco. He'd spend Saturday afternoon with our father, discussing market trends and property values, then take me out to dinner because you need a break. He'd ask about the medication schedule, the doctor's appointments, whether I needed money for anything. He always picked up the check. "You're doing an amazing thing," he told me over pasta one night. "Dad's lucky to have you." I'd smiled and changed the subject. The hospice nurse, Andrea, came 3 times a week. She was in her 50s, efficient and kind, with the sort of calm competence that made crisis feel manageable. She taught me how to adjust the hospital bed, how to spot signs of infection, how to keep my father comfortable as his body failed. "You're a natural caregiver," she said one afternoon, watching me adjust his pillows. "Some people have the instinct, some don't. You have it." I didn't tell her I'd never wanted it. Month 2 brought complications. Jaundice, ascites, pain that broke through the medications. The oncologist adjusted dosages, added anti-nausea drugs, suggested we consider palliative options sooner rather than later. My father refused to discuss it. "I'm not dead yet," he said. His law firm, the one that managed his estate planning, sent a representative. Harold Peterson, 60-something gray suit, leather briefcase. He arrived on a Tuesday morning and spent 2 hours in my father's study with the door closed. I made coffee and wondered what they were discussing. Funeral arrangements, probably. Final wishes. The foundation my father had mentioned establishing. Harold left without speaking to me. That night, my father seemed agitated. He barely touched his dinner. When I asked if he wanted to watch the news, our usual routine, he said he was tired and wanted to sleep. I helped him into bed, adjusted his pillows, made sure the call button was within reach. "Vivian," he said, as I turned to leave. "Yes?" He looked at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. "Thank you for being here." Something in his tone made my throat tight. "Of course, Dad." Lydia's wedding got postponed. She called crying, explaining that Jeffrey's residency schedule had changed, that they needed to push it back 6 months. "But I can come home now," she said. "I can help." "It's okay," I told her. "We're managing." "Are you sure? I feel terrible. You're doing everything." "Really, it's fine. Stay focused on the wedding planning." She sent flowers the next week, expensive ones. The card said, "To the world's best sister." I put them in the dining room where my father could see them. Month 3. The pain became constant. We increased the morphine. He slept more, ate less. His skin took on a waxy quality. Andrea started coming daily. She brought pamphlets about end-of-life care, about what to expect in the final weeks. I read them in the kitchen late at night, drinking wine I never used to need. My father started talking about my mother. She'd died 7 years earlier. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. She'd been gardening, her roses, always her roses, and simply collapsed among them. I'd flown home for the funeral, stayed a week, then returned to my life. Lydia had stayed 3 days. Nathan had given the eulogy. "She would have liked this," my father said one afternoon, gesturing vaguely around the room. "You being here, she always said you were the steady one." "I don't remember her saying that." "She did. After you graduated college, when you took that job in Portland. She said you knew what mattered." I adjusted his IV drip and didn't respond. He kept talking about their early years together when money was tight, about the first property he'd bought, how she'd helped him see its potential, about her garden, how she'd planned it like architecture, sightlines, seasonal color, structural bones, about how she'd wanted to travel more, but he'd always been too busy. "I should have taken her to see the lavender fields in Provence," he said. "She would have loved that." "You still had time," I said quietly. "Did I?" He looked at me. Did we ever have time, or did I just think we did? The question sat between us, unanswerable. Nathan came up that weekend with his wife, Angela, and their 2 kids. The children were 6 and 8, loud and energetic, filling the house with noise it hadn't held in years. My father smiled watching them, more animated than he'd been in weeks. Nathan grilled steaks. Angela made her famous potato salad. We ate on the back patio, pretending everything was normal. After dinner, Nathan pulled me aside. "How are you holding up? Really?" "I'm fine. Vivian." He used his serious voice, the one from when we were kids, and he was trying to protect me from something. "You can't do this alone forever." "I'm not alone. Andrea comes every day. You visit. Lydia calls. That's not the same as having someone here. Someone to share the load." "I can handle it." He studied me. "I know you can, but should you have to?" I didn't have an answer for that. Month 4. My father stopped eating solid food, ensure shakes, broth, water. His body was consuming itself. The cancer had metastasized, liver, lungs, lymph nodes. The doctors stopped suggesting treatments. We were in the endgame now. Harold Peterson came back. Another closed-door meeting, this one shorter. When he left, my father called me into his study. "Sit down," he said. I sat in the chair across from his desk, the one I'd sat in as a teenager when he wanted to discuss my grades, my college applications, my long-term planning. "I've been working with Harold on estate matters," he said, "making sure everything is in order." "Okay." "The bulk of the estate will be divided between you, Lydia, and Nathan. Equal shares, that's fair." I nodded. I hadn't thought about it, honestly. Money felt abstract when you were measuring medications in milliliters and marking pain levels on a chart. "There are also provisions for the grandchildren, education trusts, Angela's kids now, and any future grandchildren." He paused. "Lydia's planning a family, I assume." "I think so, eventually." "And you?" "Me? Children, a family, have you thought about it?" The question surprised me. We'd never discussed this. I don't know. Maybe someday." He nodded slowly. "You've sacrificed a lot, being here. Your job, your life in Portland, that man you were seeing." "How did you know about that?" "Lydia mentioned it." He shifted in his chair, wincing. I want you to know I appreciate it. What you've given up. Dad, you don't have to. Let me finish. His voice carried that old authority, the boardroom tone that had closed deals and silenced opposition. You've been here every day. You've managed my care with more competence than most professionals. You've put your entire life on hold. I waited. That kind of dedication deserves recognition. I want you to know it hasn't gone unnoticed. Something in my chest loosened slightly. Thank you. Harold will make sure the paperwork reflects the family's wishes. Everything will be handled properly. He was tired. I could see it in the way he slumped in his chair, the effort each word cost him. I helped him back to bed, gave him his evening medications, sat with him until he fell asleep. That night I called my friend Maya in Portland. We'd been close since college, and she'd been checking in regularly since I'd moved home. How are you doing? She asked. Actually doing, not the polite version. I looked around my childhood bedroom at the posters I'd never taken down, the bookshelf still holding my high school reading. I don't know, some days I feel okay. Some days I feel like I'm disappearing. That's normal, you're giving so much. He thanked me today, said I was being recognized for what I've done. That's good, you deserve recognition. Do I? The question came out sharper than intended. Sorry, I'm just tired. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to feel complicated about all of this. We talked for another hour, about her work, about mutual friends, about the small dramas of normal life. When I hung up, the house felt very quiet. Month 5. My father rarely left his bed now. Andrea had moved to twice daily visits, morning and evening. She'd started talking about active dying. The phrase felt like violence. We discussed DNR orders, memorial preferences, whether he wanted a religious service. He's still here, I wanted to say. He can still hear you. But I knew she was right. We were counting days now, maybe weeks. Lydia flew in for a long weekend. She'd lost weight, looked polished and tired in that specific way of successful people who don't sleep enough. She brought expensive chocolates my father couldn't eat and a cashmere blanket for his bed. Oh my God, she said, when she saw him. He looks so different. It's been 3 months since you visited. I know. Work has been insane, and the wedding planning and Jeffrey's schedule. She trailed off. I should have come sooner. We sat together in the living room that evening, drinking the good wine my father had been saving for special occasions that would never come now. How long do you think? Lydia asked. Andrea says maybe 2 weeks, maybe less. Jesus! She refilled her glass. I can't believe this is happening. I keep thinking he's going to rally, just get better through sheer force of will. He's not going to rally. I know that. It just doesn't feel real. We sat in silence for a while. Then Lydia said, Thank you for doing this. I couldn't have. I know myself. I couldn't have handled it. But you're so strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt hollowed out, going through motions I'd perfected through repetition. But I said, someone had to be. Here. Still, I know Dad appreciates it. We all do. Nathan came up the next day. We had an impromptu family gathering, the 3 of us in our father's room, talking quietly while he drifted in and out of consciousness. We told old stories, funny ones, the kind you tell at wakes to make death feel less heavy. Remember when Dad tried to teach us to ski and broke his ankle? Remember Mom's terrible pot roast? Remember the camping trip where it rained for 3 days straight? My father smiled sometimes, barely, but we saw it. That evening, the 3 of us sat in the study with Harold Peterson. He'd brought documents. Your father wanted to review the estate plan with you all present, Harold said, to ensure transparency and address any questions. He walked us through the structure. The estate was substantial: properties, investments, liquid assets. Everything would flow through a trust. Distribution would occur after probate, estimated at 6 to 9 months. Equal shares for the 3 of us, with additional provisions for grandchildren's education. The house will be sold, Harold continued. Proceeds divided among you. Your father felt it was too large for any one person to maintain, and the market conditions are favorable. Lydia nodded. Nathan asked questions about tax implications. I stayed quiet, trying to process the idea of this house, My mother's house, the only constant in my unstable geography, being sold to strangers. There are also specific bequests, Harold said. Personal items, sentimental objects. Your father has prepared a list. He handed us each a copy. I scanned mine. My mother's jewelry to be divided between Lydia and me. My father's watch collection to Nathan. Various furniture pieces and artwork distributed according to preference. At the bottom, a note in my father's handwriting. Vivian, the garden tools and seeds. Keep the roses alive. My throat closed. Any questions? Harold asked. Nathan had several. Lydia wanted clarification on the timeline. I folded my copy and put it in my pocket. After Harold left, Nathan poured us drinks from my father's scotch collection, bottles that cost more than my monthly rent in Portland used to. To Dad, Nathan said, raising his glass. To Dad, we echoed. We stayed up late, talking about logistics and memories in equal measure. Funeral arrangements, memorial service. Who would give the eulogy? Whether to do a reception at the house or somewhere else. Lydia thought we should hire a professional organizer to handle my father's belongings. Nathan wanted to make sure the business assets were properly valued. I excused myself around midnight and went to check on my father. He was sleeping, his breathing labored but steady. I sat in the chair beside his bed and watched him, this man who'd built empires, who'd terrified business rivals, who'd never learned how to say, I love you, without couching it in terms of provision and planning. I'll keep the roses. Alive, I whispered. I promise. The next week was a blur of medical interventions and family visits, and Andrea's increasingly frequent presence. My father stopped speaking, then stopped opening his eyes. His breathing became erratic, long pauses between breaths that made me think each one was the last. Nathan took family leave from work. Lydia extended her visit indefinitely. We took shifts at my father's bedside, maintaining a constant vigil. Hospice sent additional support. The house filled with flowers and casseroles from people I barely knew, business associates, country club friends, the network of professional acquaintances my father had cultivated over decades. He died on a Thursday morning at 6:47 a.m. I was alone with him when it happened. Nathan had gone home to shower. Lydia was sleeping in the guest room. The house was quiet except for the hiss of the oxygen concentrator, which had become background noise over the past weeks. His breathing changed, became shallow, rapid, then slower, then stopped. I sat there for a long moment, waiting for the next breath that didn't come. Then I called Andrea. The funeral was enormous. The church overflowed with people in expensive black suits and designer dresses. The eulogies emphasized my father's business acumen, his philanthropy, his commitment to family values. Nathan spoke beautifully about legacy and loss. Lydia read a poem. I couldn't speak. When the pastor asked if anyone else wanted to share memories, I stayed silent. At the reception, people kept approaching me, squeezing my hand, telling me how lucky my father was to have had me there at the end. He was so proud of you, they said. What a blessing that you could be there, they said. Not everyone would have sacrificed so much, they said. I smiled and nodded and accepted their condolences, and felt nothing at all. 3 weeks later, Harold Peterson called to schedule a formal reading of the will. It felt antiquated, something from movies, not real life. But Harold insisted it was important for transparency and closure. We met at his law office downtown. Nathan came straight from work. Lydia flew in that morning. I drove the familiar route in my father's car, the Mercedes he'd loved, which now sat unused in the garage. Harold's office was mahogany and leather, walls lined with law books and framed degrees. We sat in chairs across from his massive desk while he reviewed documents. This is a relatively straightforward estate, he began. Your father was very organized in his planning. The will is clear and unambiguous. He started reading the legal language, the whereas clauses and aforementioned provisions that make wills sound like they were written in another century. I half listened, still numb from the past few weeks of funeral planning and thank you notes and sleepless nights in a house that felt wrong without my father in it. Then Harold said something that made me focus. The primary residence, located at 1847 Ashwood Drive, is hereby bequeathed to Nathan Foster and Lydia Foster Myler, to be held jointly and sold at their discretion, with proceeds to be divided equally between them. I blinked. Wait, just Nathan and Lydia? Harold glanced at me. Correct. The house is divided between them. But I thought it was being split 3 ways. You said the cash assets and investment portfolio are divided 3 ways, Harold corrected. The house, specifically, is left to Nathan and Lydia. Nathan was frowning at his copy of the will. Lydia's face was carefully neutral. I don't understand, I said. Why would... Harold continued reading. The investment portfolio, valued at approximately $8.3 million, is to be divided equally among Nathan Foster, Lydia Foster Myler, and Vivian Foster. Numbers started swimming on the page. I tried to focus. The commercial properties, the Westfield Plaza, the downtown office complex, and the Madison Street Retail Center are bequeathed to Nathan Foster, recognizing his longtime involvement in the family business and his expertise in commercial real estate management. Nathan sat forward. The properties are just to me? Correct. Your father felt your professional background made you the appropriate steward of these assets. What's the value of those properties? I asked. Harold consulted his notes. Current market assessment puts the combined value at approximately $34 million. The room tilted slightly. Continuing, Harold said. The stock holdings in Foster Properties LLC are to be divided with 60% going to Nathan Foster and 40% going to Lydia Foster Myler, reflecting their respective contributions to the company's strategic direction. Lydia's neutral expression cracked slightly. I haven't worked for the company in 5 years. Your father valued your input during the Singapore expansion, Harold said. He felt it deserved recognition. I was doing math in my head. The investment, the portfolio, equal shares, that was about $2.8 million each. But Nathan was getting commercial properties worth $34 million plus 60% of company stock. Lydia was getting 40% of company stock plus half the house. I was getting... what? My equal share of the investment portfolio and nothing else? What about the personal property? Nathan asked. The cars, the artwork, the furniture? Harold flipped pages. The vehicle collection, 3 cars, are bequeathed to Nathan Foster. The artwork and antique furniture are to be divided between Nathan Foster and Lydia Foster Myler, according to the attached inventory list. My father had collected vintage cars. A 1967 Mustang, a 1972 Porsche, a 1958 Corvette. Together they were worth close to $500,000. There are specific bequests of personal items, Harold continued. To Vivian Foster, the garden tools, seeds, and rose-cutting collection, per her interest in maintaining the garden. Garden tools. I was getting garden tools. That. Also to Vivian Foster, the family photo albums and your mother's recipe collection. Photo albums. Recipes. The remaining personal effects are to be divided between Nathan and Lydia at their discretion. I couldn't breathe properly. The math was crystallizing in my mind. Nathan was getting roughly $37 million in property, cars, and stock. Lydia was getting stock and half the house, probably another $15–20 million. I was getting $2.8 million, some photos, and gardening equipment. There must be a mistake, I said. My voice sounded distant. This doesn't match what we discussed. When Harold came to the house before Dad died, he said equal shares. The investment portfolio is divided equally, Harold said. 3 equal shares of $2.8 million. But the rest is distributed according to your father's specific wishes, taking into account each beneficiary's circumstances, contributions, and ability to manage different types of assets. Nathan was staring at his copy of the will. Dad never mentioned this structure to me. Nor to me, Lydia said quietly. Are you both saying you didn't know? I looked between them. You had no idea you were getting significantly more than me. Vivian, no, Nathan said. I swear, I thought it was equal splits across the board. When did he change this? I asked Harold. When did he structure it this way? Harold consulted the document. The will was executed 3 months ago, March 15th. 3 months ago, month 2 of my father's care, right after Harold's first visit. That was when I was living there, I said. When I was taking care of him full time. Your father was very clear about his reasoning. Harold said. He felt that Nathan's professional expertise and business involvement warranted stewardship of the commercial assets. He felt Lydia's strategic mind and international experience made her an appropriate co-owner of company stock. And he felt that liquid assets were most appropriate for your circumstances. My circumstances? You've chosen a different career path, nonprofit work, grants management. Your father felt that liquid assets would provide you with flexibility and security without the burden of property management or business operations. The words landed like stones. Different career path, burden. As if my choices were handicaps that needed accommodation. He also noted your dedication to caregiving, Harold continued, pulling out a separate document. In fact, there's an addendum that specifically addresses this. Would you like me to read it? Yes, I said. Harold adjusted his glasses. To Vivian, I recognize and appreciate the personal sacrifice you made in providing care during my final months. Your presence brought comfort and dignity to a difficult time. However, I have structured your inheritance to reflect your demonstrated priorities and capabilities. While your siblings have shown aptitude for business and strategic thinking, you have shown aptitude for service and compassion. I trust that your portion will be used wisely and in accordance with your values. The garden tools and seed collection are given in recognition of your mother's legacy and your commitment to preserving what matters. The silence in the room was absolute. Service and compassion, I repeated, as opposed to business and strategic thinking. Your father was trying to acknowledge your strengths, Harold said. By giving me a fraction of what he gave them? By valuing 5 months of daily care at the price of some garden equipment? The monetary division isn't. Don't. My voice came out harder than I'd ever heard it. Don't tell me this isn't about money. Nathan is getting $40 million in assets. Lydia is getting $20 million. I'm getting less than $3 million and a fucking spade. Nathan reached for my arm. Vivian, we'll figure this out. We can adjust the division, make it more equitable. I pulled away. With what? Authority? The will is executed. It's legal. Right, Harold? The will is valid and legally binding, Harold confirmed. However, beneficiaries can choose to redistribute assets after probate if all parties agree. How generous, I said. You can choose to give me charity from what Dad decided you deserved, and I didn't. That's not fair, Lydia said. None of us wanted this. Didn't you? I looked at her. Because you knew something was wrong. Both of you. When we met here 3 weeks before Dad died and Harold outlined the equal shares distribution, he was lying. This was already executed. But neither of you asked follow-up questions. Neither of you requested documentation. We trusted Harold, Nathan said. We trusted Dad. I was living there, I said. I was the one administering medications at 3 a.m. I was the one changing sheets and managing pain crises and holding his hand while he died. And while I was doing that, he was in his study with Harold, making sure you both got the real inheritance while I got the consolation prize. He was protecting you, Harold said. He didn't want you burdened with property management or business operations that you're not equipped to handle. The rage that went through me was clean and sharp. I managed his entire medical care protocol. I coordinated with oncologists, hospice, pharmacies, insurance companies. I handled medication interactions and crisis interventions and end-of-life planning. But I'm not equipped to handle… What? Hiring a property manager? That's not what your father meant. What did he mean? Explain it to me. Use small words so my service-oriented brain can understand. Harold's jaw tightened. Your father made his wishes clear. I executed them according to his instructions. If you have concerns about the distribution, you're welcome to contest the will, though I should warn you that's a costly and rarely successful process. How much would it cost? I asked. Legal fees for a will contest typically run between $100,000 and $500,000 and can take years to resolve. Given the clarity of your father's intentions as documented, your likelihood of success is minimal. So I should just accept it. That's your choice to make. I looked at Nathan and Lydia. They both looked uncomfortable, sympathetic, and utterly inadequate. I need to go, I said, standing. Vivian, wait. Nathan said. Let's talk about this. We can work something out. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's fair distribution. This doesn't feel right to any of us. Then why didn't Dad make it right when he was alive? I grabbed my purse. Why did he wait until he was dead, and I couldn't ask him why? No one had an answer for that. I drove back to the house, their house now, Nathan and Lydia's house, and walked through rooms that suddenly felt foreign. The study where my father had planned this betrayal. The bedroom where he'd thanked me for my sacrifice. The kitchen, where I'd prepared his meals and organized his medications and convinced myself that care was its own reward. The garden was overgrown. I hadn't tended it in weeks. The roses were strangling each other, dead heads rotting on the stems. I found the garden tools in the shed, my inheritance: pruning shears, a spade, a trowel, a wooden box of seed packets, my mother's handwriting on the labels. Rosa Peace, Rosa Blaze, Rosa, Queen Elizabeth. I sat on the ground among the weeds and tried to understand what had happened. My father had looked me in the eye, had thanked me for my dedication, had told me I was being recognized, and the entire time he'd already signed documents that valued my 5 months of 24-hour care at garden tools and photo albums, while giving my siblings tens of millions of dollars in real assets. Nathan called that evening. I didn't answer. Lydia texted, "Please talk to us. We want to make this right." I turned off my phone. I spent that night going through the photo albums, part of my carefully considered inheritance. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, graduations, my parents' wedding, my mother in her garden, the 3 of us as children before we learned what we were worth. There was a pattern I'd never noticed before. In group photos, my father's hand was always on Nathan's shoulder or Lydia's back. Proud, possessive. I was always slightly apart, smiling at the camera, present but not claimed. I found my mother's recipe collection in the kitchen. Her handwriting filled the margins with notes. Add more garlic, perfect for Easter, your father's favorite. Recipes for the dinners she'd cooked for 40 years, feeding the family that had just discarded me. The doorbell rang the next morning. Nathan stood on the porch, looking exhausted. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat in the living room, the furniture that would be divided between him and Lydia at their discretion. He looked around like he was seeing the house for the first time. "I talked to my lawyer last night," he said, "about redistribution options. We can equalize the inheritance after probate. It's completely legal. I give you half the commercial properties, Lydia gives you part of her stock holdings and a larger share of the house proceeds. We can make the division actually equal. How generous. Vivian, please, I know you're angry. Do you? Do you know what it feels like to realize your father valued you at garden tools while he was dying in your arms?" Nathan's face crumpled. He wasn't thinking clearly. The cancer, the medications. He was clear enough to work with Harold, clear enough to write an addendum explaining his reasoning, clear enough to make sure it was all legally bulletproof. I leaned forward. "When did you figure it out? When did you realize this was wrong?" "When Harold read the distribution. I swear to you, I had no idea." "You never asked? In all those conversations about estate planning and property values, you never asked what I was getting?" "I assumed." He stopped. "I don't know what I assumed. That it would be fair. That Dad wouldn't what? Wouldn't value his children differently based on their professions? Wouldn't punish me for choosing nonprofit work instead of business? Wouldn't decide that caregiving is worth less than conference calls? That's not what he was doing." "Then what was he doing?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I think he was trying to protect you." The laugh that came out of me was ugly. "From what? Financial security? From the burden of managing complex assets? From the pressure of maintaining the business relationships? From being treated like an equal adult who could make her own decisions?" I stood up. "You know what's funny? I've spent the past 5 months managing complex medical protocols, coordinating between multiple specialists, making life and death decisions about pain management and DNR orders. But apparently that doesn't translate to being capable of hiring a property manager for a shopping center." "You're right. You're absolutely right." Nathan stood too. "Let me fix this. Let us fix this. Lydia and I can redistribute the assets. We'll make it equal. And then what? I spend the rest of my life knowing my siblings gave me charity because my father didn't think I deserved an inheritance? Grateful for your generous redistribution of what should have been mine in the first place? It's not charity. It's correcting an injustice. Why didn't you correct it before? The question came out sharper than I intended. You visited every other weekend. You had private conversations with Dad about business. Why didn't you ever ask, "Hey, what's Vivian getting? Is she being taken care of?" Nathan's silence was answer enough. You didn't ask, I said. Because it didn't occur to you that it might be unfair. Because, in your mind, of course, Dad was leaving you the business assets. Of course you were the heir apparent. I was just the daughter who moved home to play nurse. That's not... Get out. Vivian, get out of my house. I stopped. Sorry, your house, the house you and Lydia now own jointly. I'm just the person who lived here for 5 months while your father died. I'll be out by the end of the week. Nathan left looking stricken. I spent the next 3 days packing. My clothes, my books, the personal items I'd brought from Portland. I boxed up the photo albums and recipe cards, my inheritance. I took the garden tools from the shed. I left everything else. On my last morning in the house, I walked through my mother's garden. The roses were dying. I thought about my father's note. Keep the roses alive. I had pruning shears, I had seeds, I had tools. I had been given the tools to maintain beauty I could never own. I left them in the shed. Lydia called as I was loading my car. I answered this time. Please don't leave like this, she said. We need to talk. We need to fix this. How? I asked. How do you fix being valued at garden tools? By redistributing the assets. Nathan and I have been talking to our lawyers. We can equalize everything within 6 months as soon as probate clears. And that would make you feel better? Writing me a check to absolve your guilt? It's not about guilt. It's about what's right. What's right? I repeated. Lydia, do you know what I did for 5 months? Do you actually know? You took care of Dad. You were amazing. I administered morphine at 2 a.m. when he was screaming from pain. I cleaned up vomit and blood and shit. I held him while he cried because he was scared of dying. I slept on a cot in his room for 3 weeks because he couldn't be alone. I canceled my entire life. And while I was doing that, he was making sure you and Nathan got the real inheritance while I got the servant's reward. He didn't. Think of it that way. How do you know? Did he tell you? Did you have conversations with him about his estate planning that I wasn't privy to? Lydia was quiet for a moment. Then, Jeffrey and I are starting a business, a medical technology startup. Dad knew about it. He said the stock holdings and house proceeds would give us the capital we needed to launch properly. The information landed like a slap. When did you tell him about this? 4 months ago, right after he was diagnosed. 4 months ago. When I was setting up the hospital bed and learning how to read medication dosages. When I was researching pancreatic cancer survival rates and coordinating with hospice. So he knew you needed money for a business venture, I said slowly. And he structured his will to make sure you got enough capital to launch it. How thoughtful. Vivian, it wasn't like that. What was it like? Explain it to me. You told our dying father about your business plans and he made sure to provide for them. Did you also mention that I'd quit my job? That I'd given up my apartment? That I had no income and no plan for after he died? I assumed he'd make sure you were taken care of too. He did. With garden tools. Very thoughtful. I hung up. I drove to Portland. My old apartment was rented to someone else, but Maya let me crash on her couch while I figured things out. She didn't ask many questions, just made space for me and let me exist in the wreckage. What are you going to do? She asked after I'd been there a week. I don't know. Are you going to let them redistribute the assets? I thought about Nathan's offer, the generous redistribution, the magnanimous gesture that would let them sleep at night while I spent the rest of my life knowing I'd needed their charity to get what should have been mine. No, I said. Why not? Because it doesn't fix what's broken. It just puts a Band-Aid on it and asks me to be grateful. Maya nodded, slowly. So what will fix it? I didn't have an answer. I spent the next month applying for jobs, trying to restart the life I'd abandoned. But 5 months out of the workforce in the nonprofit sector might as well be 5 years. Positions had been filled. Budgets had been cut. The landscape had shifted. My savings, what I'd had before moving home, were nearly gone. I'd paid rent on my Portland apartment for 2 months after moving home before finally breaking the lease. I'd paid for medical supplies that insurance didn't cover. I'd paid for groceries and household expenses and 1,000 small costs that added up without my noticing. The $2.8 million from my father's estate was still in probate. 6 to 9 months, Harold had said. Maybe longer if there were complications. Nathan kept calling. So did Lydia. I didn't answer. They sent emails, long ones explaining their reasoning, their guilt, their desire to fix things. Nathan sent spreadsheets showing exactly how they'd redistribute assets to create equity. Lydia sent messages about family and forgiveness and moving forward together. I deleted them all. Maya came home one evening to find me surrounded by papers. My father's will, printed out and annotated. I'd been going through it line by line, trying to understand the architecture of my own erasure. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Loopholes, mistakes, something." Harold said contesting it would cost hundreds of thousands and probably fail. I know. So what's the point? I looked at the document, at my father's signature, witnessed and notarized, at Harold's careful legal language, at the addendum that explained my purpose, service and compassion, as opposed to business and strategic thinking. He was lucid when he signed this, I said. The cancer hadn't spread to his brain. He wasn't on heavy medications yet. He knew exactly what he was doing. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know. I kept looking. Late into the night, reading through trust documents and property records and corporate filings, looking for something I couldn't name, and then I found it. Not a loophole, not a mistake, something else entirely. 3 days later, I called Harold Peterson. "Vivian," he said, sounding surprised. "How are you?" "I have questions about the estate." "Of course. What can I clarify?" "The commercial properties that were left to Nathan, the Westfield Plaza, the downtown office complex, and the Madison Street Retail Center. When were they acquired?" "I'd need to check the exact dates. Why?" "Because I want to know if any of them were purchased during my parents' marriage with community property funds." Silence on the other end. "Harold?" "The properties were acquired by your father over the course of several decades. Some predated the marriage, some did not." "And California is a community property state." "Yes." "Which means anything acquired during the marriage with community funds belonged equally to both my parents?" "That's correct, but your mother's share of the community property was settled in her estate when she died 7 years ago." "Was it?" "Because I'd like to see my mother's will." More silence. "Harold, I'm requesting a copy of my mother's will. That's a reasonable request from her daughter." "Of course, I'll have it sent to you." The document arrived 2 days later. I read it in Maya's living room, my hands shaking. My mother's will was simple. Everything to my father. All property, all assets, all rights and interests. Standard for a married couple, the lawyer in me understood. But the daughter in me saw something else. A signature page dated 3 weeks before her death. Witnessed by Harold Peterson and his paralegal. My mother had died of a sudden heart attack. No warning. But 3 weeks before, she'd been in Harold's office, updating her will. I called Nathan. "Vivian," he said, relief flooding his voice. "I'm so glad you called. I've been trying to reach you. Did you know Mom updated her will 3 weeks before she died?" "What?" "Her will. It was executed 3 weeks before her heart attack. Did you know about it?" "No. Why would I? That was 7 years ago." "Because it's strange, don't you think? A healthy 60-year-old woman suddenly decides to update her estate planning and then dies 3 weeks later? People update their wills all the time. It doesn't mean anything. It means she was thinking about death, or someone was making her think about it. What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm observing a pattern. Mom updates her will, giving everything to Dad. She dies. Dad inherits everything, including her share of community property. Then 7 years later, Dad gives almost everything to you and Lydia, cutting me out. Don't you think that's interesting? Vivian, you're spiraling. The grief, the anger, it's making you see conspiracies that don't exist. Did Dad ever mention Mom's will to you?" "No." "Did he ever talk about their estate planning?" "Not in detail." "Why?" "Because I want to understand the full picture. I want to know what Mom intended." Nathan sighed. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know if Mom wanted her children cut out of the inheritance. If she wanted her life's work, helping Dad build that business, managing those properties, to go to 2 of her children while the third got garden tools. Mom died 7 years ago. We can't know what she wanted. Can't we? I hung up and called Harold again. I need to see all estate planning documents for both my parents, I said. Everything. Wills, trusts, property transfers, the complete record. Some of those documents are confidential. I'm a beneficiary. I have a legal right to understand the estate structure, unless you'd like me to hire my own lawyer to compel production. The documents arrived a week later. Boxes of them. I spread them across Maya's apartment and started reading. My mother's estate planning history went back 30 years. The early wills were mutual, everything to the surviving spouse, then divided equally among the children. Standard, sensible. But 8 years ago, 1 year before her death, something changed. A new will. Everything to my father, with a provision. Upon his death, the estate would be divided equally among all children. Then 6 months later, an amendment. The equal division clause was removed. No explanation. Then 3 weeks before her death, a complete rewrite. Everything to my father. No provisions for children specified. His discretion entirely. 3 versions in 8 months, each one removing more protection for her children's inheritance. I found correspondence between my father and Harold during that period, discussing estate planning optimization and tax efficiency, and ensuring maximum flexibility for the surviving spouse. I found notes from meetings where my father expressed concern about future family dynamics and differing levels of financial acumen among potential beneficiaries. I found a memo from Harold recommending that community property assets be strategically positioned to allow the surviving spouse maximum control over distribution. My mother had signed all of it. I tried to imagine her in Harold's office, reviewing documents that would eventually cut her daughter out of the family wealth. Had she known? Had she understood what she was signing, or had my father presented it as routine, technical, necessary for tax purposes? Had she trusted him? I called Lydia. Did Mom ever talk to you about estate planning? I asked. God, Vivian, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Did she? Lydia paused. No. Why? Did she ever express opinions about inheritance? About fairness among siblings? She said we should take care of each other. She said family was more important than money. The usual mom stuff. Lydia's voice softened. Why are you asking about Mom? Because I'm trying to understand how we got here. How Dad could look at his 3 children and decide one of them deserved garden tools while the others got millions. Vivian, please, let us fix this. The redistribution plan is ready. We're just waiting for you to agree. Did Mom know Dad was planning to cut me out? What? No, of course not. She died 7 years before Dad made his will. But she signed away her control over community property. She gave Dad the right to distribute everything however he wanted. Did she know she was doing that? I don't know. I wasn't involved in their estate planning, neither was Nathan. But you were involved in Dad's estate planning. You told him about your business venture 4 months before he died. You told him you needed capital. That was just conversation. I didn't ask him to structure his will around it. But he did. He made sure you got the stock holdings and house proceeds that would fund your startup. He provided for your needs, just not mine. Because he thought you'd be okay with liquid assets. Because he didn't think you wanted the burden of property management. Or because he thought my 5 months of caregiving was worth less than your 15-minute conversation about a business idea. Lydia's breath caught. That's not fair, isn't it? You planted a seed, mentioned you needed money, and he made sure you got it. I planted myself in his house for 5 months, and he made sure I got garden tools. What's unfair about that observation? I didn't manipulate him. Neither did I, but somehow my presence counted for less than your absence. I hung up. Maya found me that night surrounded by documents, making lists. What are you doing? She asked. Mapping the estate structure. Understanding the flow of assets. Why? Because there's something wrong here, something beyond the unfair distribution. What do you mean? I showed her the timeline. My mother's will changes. The removal of equal distribution clauses. The strategic positioning of community property. My father's conversations with Harold about financial acumen and differing capabilities. They spent 8 months restructuring everything to remove my mother's protections for equal inheritance, I said. 8 months of meetings and amendments and strategic positioning, and then she died. Maya looked at the documents. You think your father planned this before your mother died? I think he was planning something. I think he'd already decided Nathan and Lydia were better investments. I think he'd already decided I was the daughter who'd need less because I'd chosen service over business. But your mother was alive during these changes. She signed them. She signed what her husband told her to sign. What Harold told her was necessary for tax optimization and estate efficiency. I pulled out another document. Look at this. A memo from Harold to my father, dated 2 months before Mom's death. It recommends transferring additional property into my father's name alone to maximize estate planning flexibility and avoid potential future disputes among beneficiaries. That's not illegal. No, but it's deliberate. It's systematic erasure of my mother's say in how her children would inherit, and she either didn't understand what she was signing or she trusted my father to be fair. Which do you think it was? I thought about my mother, about her gardens and her recipes and her endless patience with my father's absences, about how she'd never challenged him, never questioned his business decisions, never asserted her own authority. I think she trusted him, I said. And I think he used that trust to cut me out before she died, so she'd never know. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, What are you going to do with this information? I don't know yet, but I was starting to have ideas. I requested more documents, bank records from my parents' joint accounts, property transfer records, meeting notes from Harold's files. I cited my rights as a beneficiary, my need to understand the estate, my concern about potential irregularities. Harold pushed back. These requests are becoming excessive. What exactly are you looking for? Clarity, I said. Transparency. The full picture of how my inheritance was calculated. Your inheritance was calculated according to your father's clearly stated wishes. Wishes that were shaped by 8 months of strategic planning before my mother died. Wishes that were structured to give him complete control over her community property assets. Wishes that somehow aligned perfectly with cutting out the daughter who hadn't discussed business ventures with him. Your father had every legal right to distribute his property as he saw fit. Did he? Or did he have legal right to distribute community property that should have been half my mother's? Property that she might have wanted divided equally among her children? Your mother's will gave him that property. Her will that was rewritten 3 times in 8 months, each version removing more protections for equal inheritance. Her will that was finalized 3 weeks before her sudden death. Don't you find that interesting, Harold? I find it irrelevant to the current estate distribution. Do you? Because I'm starting to think it's very relevant. I'm starting to think there's a pattern here of systematic planning to ensure certain children got more than others. And I'm starting to wonder if my mother knew about it. Harold's voice went cold. If you're suggesting some form of impropriety, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm observing facts, facts that I'm entitled to understand as a beneficiary and as my mother's daughter. Your mother has been dead for 7 years. Her estate was settled. This is a separate matter. Is it? Because it seems to me that my father's ability to cut me out of his will depended entirely on my mother signing away her community property rights, which she did under your legal advice. Advice that positioned my father to make unilateral decisions about assets that should have been half hers. I provided sound legal counsel to both your parents. Did you? Or did you provide counsel that served my father's interests while technically meeting your legal obligations to my mother? I resent that implication. I resent being valued at garden tools. We all have our grievances. I hung up, feeling something shift inside me. Not peace, not acceptance, something sharper, control. I spent the next week going through my mother's personal papers, the ones that had been in her desk, that were technically mine now as part of the family archives provision. Letters, notes, appointment calendars. I found entries from 8 years ago. Lunch with Harold. Meeting about estate updates. Appointment 2. Review. Documents. I found a note in her handwriting. Ask about children's inheritance protection. H says not necessary, given our age and health. She'd asked, she'd tried to protect us, and Harold had dismissed her concerns. I found another note, dated 6 months later. Discuss dividing assets equally among children. H and father's names say better to give flexibility for different needs. She'd asked again, and they'd talked her out of it. I found a final note, dated 2 months before her death. Signed new documents, trust H, and father's name, know what's best. She'd surrendered. She'd chosen to trust. And they'd used that trust to structure an inheritance that would cut me out. I photographed everything: the notes, the calendar entries, the evidence that my mother had tried to protect equal inheritance and been systematically talked out of it. Then I called a lawyer, not Harold, not my father's attorney, a litigation attorney who specialized in estate disputes and fiduciary duty. Her name was Patricia Morgan. She had steel gray hair and sharp eyes, and a reputation for winning impossible cases. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. The caregiving, the will, the distribution, the timeline of my mother's estate planning changes, the notes showing she'd tried to protect equal inheritance, the systematic removal of those protections under Harold's advice. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What do you want?" "I want what I should have gotten: equal distribution of all assets, including the community property that was my mother's." "That's a different claim than contesting your father's will. You're essentially arguing that your mother's estate was improperly settled because she was not adequately represented or informed when signing away her rights." "Can we make that argument?" "Possibly. If we can show that Harold had a conflict of interest, that he was primarily serving your father's interests, while ostensibly representing both of them. If we can show your mother didn't understand what she was signing. If we can show the estate planning was structured specifically to circumvent her wishes for equal inheritance. Her notes show she wanted equal inheritance. They show she asked about it multiple times and was talked out of it." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's helpful, but we'd need more. We'd need to show that Harold breached his fiduciary duty to her, that your father exerted undue influence, that the estate planning was essentially a fraud on your mother's rights." "Is that provable?" "Maybe. If we can get Harold's complete files, if we can depose him about his representation of your mother versus your father, if we can show a pattern of prioritizing your father's interests." She looked at me carefully. "But I need to be clear about something. This is a scorched earth approach. You're not just contesting your father's will. You're potentially reopening your mother's estate, alleging professional misconduct by the family attorney, and accusing your father of manipulating your mother. Your siblings will oppose this. Your family relationships will be destroyed." "They're already destroyed." "Are they?" "Because from where I'm sitting, your siblings have offered to redistribute assets voluntarily. They've acknowledged the unfairness. They want to fix it. With charity. With their generous allowance of what should have been mine in the first place. And if you pursue this litigation, you might get nothing. We might lose. You might spend years in court, hundreds of thousands in legal fees, and end up with less than the redistribution offer. Or I might win. You might, but at what cost?" I thought about Nathan's spreadsheets, Lydia's emails about family and forgiveness, the easy path of accepting their guilt money and moving on. I thought about my father's addendum, service and compassion, as opposed to business and strategic thinking. I thought about 5 months of 3 a.m. medication doses and pain management and holding his hand while he died. "What's the cost of accepting that my caregiving was worth garden tools?" I asked. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Then let's burn it down." We filed the lawsuit 3 weeks later. The complaint was comprehensive. We alleged Harold Peterson breached his fiduciary duty to my mother by prioritizing my father's interests in estate planning. My mother was not adequately informed about the implications of removing equal inheritance protections. My father exerted undue influence over my mother's estate planning decisions. The systematic restructuring of community property was designed to circumvent my mother's wishes. My mother's estate should be reopened and community property redistributed according to her actual intentions. Harold should be held liable for professional misconduct. We requested nullification of my mother's final will, provisions regarding community property, redistribution of all community property assets equally among all 3 children, reimbursement of all legal fees, punitive damages against Harold for breach of fiduciary duty, Nathan called within an hour of being served. "What the fuck, Vivian?" "Hello, Nathan." "You're suing us? You're suing Harold? What are you doing?" "I'm claiming what should have been mine." What should have been Mom's to give equally? We offered to redistribute. We offered to make it equal. You offered charity. I'm claiming my rights. This is insane. You're going to destroy the family over money? The family was destroyed when Dad decided I was worth less than you. I'm just making it official. He didn't think that. He wrote it down, Nathan, in legal documents. He valued my 5 months of caregiving at garden tools and photo albums. He gave you $40 million. The math is pretty clear. So you're going to drag Mom into this, drag Harold into court, spend years in litigation that you'll probably lose. Maybe. Or maybe I'll win. Maybe I'll prove that Mom wanted us to inherit equally, and you and Dad and Harold systematically prevented that. Mom gave everything to Dad voluntarily. Did she? Or did she trust the man she'd been married to for 40 years and the lawyer who'd represented them for decades? Did she understand that she was signing away her children's right to equal inheritance? Because her notes suggest she didn't. Silence. You have her notes? Nathan asked finally. I have everything. Calendar entries, questions she asked Harold, concerns she raised about protecting equal inheritance. All the evidence of her being talked out of her own wishes. This is going to get ugly. It's already ugly. I'm just refusing to pretend it isn't. Nathan hung up. Lydia called next. She was crying. How could you do this? How could you sue us? I'm not suing you. I'm suing to reopen Mom's estate and challenge Harold's representation. It's the same thing. We're named in the lawsuit as beneficiaries of an improperly settled estate. If I win, you'll have to return the excess assets you received. That's not personal. It's completely personal. You're trying to take away everything Dad left us because you're angry. I'm trying to claim what Mom would have wanted, equal inheritance for all her children. You don't know what she wanted. I have her notes. She asked about equal inheritance multiple times. She was talked out of it by Dad and Harold. That's documented. So what? So you're going to drag her memory through court? Make her look like she was too stupid to understand her own estate planning? No, I'm going to prove she was manipulated by the men she trusted. There's a difference. This is going to take years. It's going to cost a fortune. And for what? You already have your inheritance from Dad. I have less than 10% of what you and Nathan got. I have the portion Dad felt was appropriate for the daughter who chose service over business. We've offered to fix that. You've offered to give me charity to absolve your guilt. That's not the same as acknowledging I was wronged. Of course you were wronged. We've said that from the beginning. We want to make it right. Then support my lawsuit. Testify that Mom wanted equal inheritance. Help me prove Harold breached his duty to her. Lydia went quiet. That's what I thought, I said. You're asking us to destroy Dad's reputation, to accuse him of manipulating Mom, to turn against Harold, who's been the family attorney for 30 years. We can't do that. Why not, if it's true? Because it's not true. Dad loved Mom. He would never have manipulated her. He cut me out of the inheritance while I was caring for him, while I was administering his medications and holding his hand through pain crises. He looked me in the eye and thanked me for my sacrifice, and the whole time he'd already signed documents valuing that sacrifice at garden tools. You think that's love? I think he was sick. I think he was scared. I think he made a mistake. A mistake that required 8 months of strategic planning with Harold before Mom even died. A mistake that involved systematically removing her protections for equal inheritance. That's not a mistake. That's a plan. Lydia was crying harder now. Please don't do this. Please. We can fix it without destroying everything. You can't fix what you won't acknowledge. You want to throw money at the problem and call it solved. I want the truth. The truth is going to hurt all of us. I'm already hurt. Now it's someone else's turn. I hung up. The lawsuit moved slowly, the way lawsuits do. Discovery requests, document production, depositions scheduled and rescheduled. Harold's attorneys fought everything. They argued my mother's estate was properly settled, that I had no standing to challenge it 7 years later, that the statute of limitations had passed. Patricia fought back. She argued that fraud and undue influence told the statute of limitations, that I couldn't have known about the misconduct until I saw the pattern in my father's will. that I had every right as my mother's daughter to ensure her wishes were honored. The court ordered production of Harold's complete files, decades of documents, every meeting note, every email, every memo about my parents' estate planning. We found treasure, email exchanges between Harold and my father discussing positioning assets to maximize control and ensuring flexibility in distribution decisions, memos recommending strategies to consolidate authority with the surviving spouse, and minimize constraints from community property claims. Notes from meetings where my father expressed concerns about different levels of financial capability among his children. Concerns documented 5 years before I quit my job to care for him. We found evidence that Harold had billed my father separately and significantly more than my mother for estate planning services, suggesting he viewed my father as his primary client, despite ostensibly representing both. We found a memo from Harold to my father, dated 1 year before my mother's death, outlining a comprehensive strategy for structuring the estate to allow maximum discretion in beneficiary selection based on demonstrated capability and need. Patricia smiled when she saw that one. This is good. This shows premeditation. Shows Harold knew exactly what he was doing, helping your father structure things to cut you out. Is it enough? It's a start, but we need more. We need to prove your mother didn't understand what she was signing, that she relied on Harold's advice, and he betrayed that trust. We deposed Harold. 6 hours of questions about his representation, his billings, his communications with my father versus my mother. He was polished, professional, he maintained that he'd represented both my parents equally, that my mother had been fully informed, that all estate planning decisions were made jointly. Then Patricia showed him my mother's notes, the entries about wanting equal inheritance, the questions she'd asked, the concerns Harold had dismissed. Did you discuss these concerns with your client? Patricia asked. I discussed all estate planning matters with both my clients. But Mrs. Foster raised specific concerns about equal inheritance. Did you advise her of the implications of removing those protections? I advised her of all relevant legal implications. Did you tell her that removing equal inheritance provisions would allow her husband to cut out one or more children entirely? I explained that the revised structure provided flexibility. That's not what I asked. Did you specifically inform her that her husband could, under the new structure, leave the majority of community property assets to only some of her children? Harold hesitated. The structure provided the surviving spouse with discretion to address different circumstances and needs among beneficiaries. Yes or no, Mr. Peterson? Did you inform Mrs. Foster that she was signing away her children's right to equal inheritance? I informed her that she was giving her husband discretion in distribution decisions, which you knew meant he could cut out one child entirely. I knew it provided flexibility. Flexibility to disinherit. Yes or no? Yes. Patricia let that hang in the air. And did you inform Mrs. Foster that this was your recommendation? That you were advising her husband to structure the estate this way specifically to allow unequal distribution? I provided estate planning advice to both clients. Mr. Peterson, we have your memos to Mr. Foster. We have your emails discussing strategies to maximize discretion and minimize constraints. We have billing records showing you charged him 3 times more than you charged his wife for the same estate planning work. Did you or did you not primarily represent Mr. Foster's interests in this matter? Harold's jaw tightened. I represented both clients within the bounds of professional ethics. That's not an answer. That's the only answer I'm giving. We deposed Nathan and Lydia. They were hostile witnesses, reluctant and defensive. Nathan testified that my father had never discussed cutting me out of the inheritance, that he'd assumed everything was equal, that he'd been shocked by the will distribution. And yet you never asked, Patricia said. In all your conversations with your father about estate planning, about business succession, about the commercial properties, you never once asked what your sister was receiving? I assumed it would be fair. But you discussed your own inheritance. Your father told you about the commercial properties. We discussed business succession. It wasn't about inheritance. But you knew you were inheriting the properties. Eventually. Yes. And you never thought to ask if your siblings were receiving equal value? Nathan looked uncomfortable. I trusted my father to be fair. Even though he was giving you properties worth $40 million, I didn't know the exact values. But you knew they were substantial. Yes? And you thought that was fair? That you should receive substantially more than your siblings? I thought my business experience justified it. Patricia smiled. So you did think unequal distribution was appropriate. You thought you deserved more. That's not what I meant. But it's what you believed. That your sister's career in nonprofit work made her less deserving of an inheritance than you were. No, I never thought that. Then why didn't you question receiving $40 million while she received less than $3 million? Nathan had no answer. Lydia's deposition was worse. She admitted to discussing her business venture with my father, admitted he'd asked about funding needs, admitted she'd known the stock holdings and house proceeds would provide startup capital. So you planted the seed, Patricia said. You mentioned needing money, and your father structured his estate to provide it. I didn't ask him to do that, but you benefited from it. I didn't know he was cutting Vivian out. You knew you were receiving more. You knew the stock holdings and house proceeds would give you significant capital. You just didn't ask what your sister was getting. I thought it would be equal. Why? When your father was specifically tailoring your inheritance to fund your business, why would you think your sister was getting the same consideration? Lydia's eyes filled with tears. Because I didn't think Dad would do that. I didn't think he'd value us differently. But he did, and you accepted it. I offered to redistribute. After you'd already received the benefits, after you'd already allowed your sister to sacrifice 5 months of her life caring for your father while you stayed in Singapore planning a business he was secretly funding. That's not fair. Isn't it? Your sister gave up her job, her apartment, her life. You gave up nothing, and your father rewarded you for it. The testimony was damning. Patricia compiled it into a brief that painted a clear picture. A patriarch who'd decided years in advance which children deserved wealth. A lawyer who'd helped structure that preference into legally bulletproof documents. And a mother who'd been manipulated into signing away her children's equal inheritance rights. The court ordered mediation, a neutral third party to help us settle before trial. We met in a conference room downtown, me and Patricia on one side, Nathan, Lydia, and their attorneys on the other. Harold and his attorneys in the corner, trying to look confident. The mediator was a retired judge, gray-haired and patient. She reviewed the case summary and said, "This is a mess." "Agreed," Patricia said. "Ms. Foster, what do you want?" "Equal distribution of all community property assets, approximately $13 million, to bring my inheritance in line with my siblings." Nathan's attorney spoke up. "Our clients have offered voluntary redistribution that would achieve the same result without litigation." "Your clients offered charity," Patricia said. "My client is claiming her legal rights. Rights that are questionable at best. The statute of limitations is told by fraud and undue influence, which we've documented extensively." The mediator held up a hand. "Let's focus on resolution. Mr. Foster, Ms. Foster-Myler, are you prepared to offer equal distribution?" Nathan looked miserable. "Yes, we've always been prepared to do that. With conditions," his attorney added. "Release of all claims against Mr. Peterson. No admission of wrongdoing. Confidentiality agreement about the settlement terms." "No," I said. Everyone looked at me. "No conditions. Equal distribution of assets, period. No protection for Harold. No confidentiality. No forced absolution." "That's not reasonable," Harold's attorney said. "If you're receiving everything you're asking for." "I'm not receiving everything I'm asking for. I'm asking for acknowledgement that this was wrong, that Harold breached his duty to my mother, that my father planned to cut me out years in advance. I want that on the record." "We can't admit to professional misconduct," Harold said. His voice was tight. "Then we'll go to trial and let a jury decide." The mediation lasted 6 hours, back and forth. Offers and counteroffers. My siblings willing to redistribute assets, but unwilling to throw Harold under the bus. Harold willing to settle, but unwilling to admit wrongdoing. Me unwilling to accept money without acknowledgement. Finally, the mediator called for a break. Patricia and I stepped into the hallway. "They're going to offer you $15 million, she said. "More than you're entitled to, even with equal distribution. But they want a full release and confidentiality." "I don't want their extra money. Vivian, $15 million. That's more than we'd likely get at trial with none of the risk." "But no admission of wrongdoing." No, they'll never admit that. I thought about it. About $15 million. About financial security for the rest of my life. About the easy path. What happens if we go to trial? I asked. We might win. We might lose. It could take 2 years. Could cost $500,000 in legal fees. And even if we win, the court might not award punitive damages. You might end up with less than the settlement offer. But it would be on the record. Harold's misconduct, my father's planning, all of it. Patricia studied me. Is that worth the risk? I thought about my mother's notes, about her asking for equal inheritance and being talked out of it, about her trusting the men in her life to be fair. Yes, I said. We rejected the settlement offer. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out. We spent the time preparing exhibits, witness lists, expert testimony about fiduciary duty and undue influence. Patricia brought in a legal ethics expert who reviewed Harold's files and testified that his representation of my mother was inadequate, that his loyalty was clearly to my father, that he'd breached his professional obligations. We brought in a forensic accountant who mapped the flow of assets and showed how the estate planning systematically shifted community property into my father's sole control. We brought in a psychologist who testified about elder manipulation and undue influence in estate planning. The defense fought hard. They argued my mother was sophisticated and educated, that she understood what she was signing, that her notes showed questions, but not incomprehension. They argued Harold had served both clients appropriately, that different billing rates didn't. Prove conflict of interest, that estate planning always involves difficult decisions. They put Nathan and Lydia on the stand to testify about our family dynamics, about how my father had wanted to protect me from business burdens, about how he'd valued my caregiving and compassion, about how the inheritance structure reflected different capabilities, not different worth. It was brutal, but then Patricia put me on the stand. She walked me through the 5 months of caregiving, the medications, the pain management, the 3 a.m. crises, the physical care of a dying man, the emotional weight of watching your father disintegrate. She asked about our conversations, about him thanking me for my sacrifice, about him telling me I was being recognized. She showed the jury my father's addendum, read it aloud. Service and compassion, as opposed to business and strategic thinking. What did you think when you read that? She asked. I thought my father believed caring for him was worth less than a business degree. And the garden tools? What did you think when you saw that was your primary bequest? I thought he was giving me the tools to maintain something I could never own. Explain that. My mother's garden, the roses. He gave me her seeds and tools and told me to keep them alive. But the garden belongs to Nathan and Lydia now. They own the house. They can pave it over if they want. I got the responsibility without the authority, the obligation without the asset. Patricia paused. Did you love your father? Yes. Do you love him now? I thought about that. About the man who'd built an empire. About the father who'd never learned to say, I love you without conditions. About the dying patient who'd thanked me while cutting me out. I love who I thought he was, I said. I'm not sure I ever knew who he actually was. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They found that Harold had breached his fiduciary duty to my mother. They found that my father had exerted undue influence over my mother's estate planning. They found that my mother's final will, provisions regarding community property, should be nullified. They ordered redistribution of community property assets equally among all 3 children. They awarded me my legal fees. They awarded punitive damages against Harold in the amount of $2 million. I won. Nathan and Lydia were devastated. They'd have to return approximately $13 million in assets, mostly from the commercial properties and stock holdings. Their inheritances would be halved. Harold was professionally ruined. The Bar Association opened an investigation. His firm asked him to resign. And me? I sat in the courtroom after the verdict and felt nothing. Not triumph, not relief, just emptiness. I'd won the battle. I'd proven my father had planned to cut me out. I'd exposed Harold's misconduct. I'd forced my siblings to acknowledge the injustice. But none of it brought my father back. None of it made him value me differently. None of it changed what I learned about my place in his hierarchy. Patricia found me in the courthouse hallway. You did it, she said. You won everything. Did I? The jury agreed with us completely. You'll receive equal distribution, plus fees, plus punitive damages. That's total victory. Then why doesn't it feel like victory? Patricia sat beside me. Because money doesn't fix betrayal. Justice doesn't heal wounds. You won the legal case, but the emotional case, that's not something a jury can resolve. So what was the point? The point was refusing to accept being erased. The point was fighting back when everyone told you to be grateful for scraps. The point was making them see you. Do they see me, or do they just resent me? Does it matter? I thought about that. About Nathan and Lydia, who'd offered redistribution but couldn't acknowledge the deeper wrong. About my father, who'd valued my caregiving at Garden, tools. About my mother, who'd trusted the wrong people. I don't know, I said. The asset redistribution took months. Property valuations, stock transfers, legal fees and court orders and endless paperwork. Nathan called once during the process. I hope you're happy, he said. His voice was flat. You got what you wanted. Did I? You destroyed the family, you bankrupted Harold, you made Dad look like a monster. Congratulations. I didn't make Dad look like anything. I just exposed what he actually did. He was trying to protect you by valuing me at Garden Tools while I held his hand through death. That's not protection, Nathan, that's erasure. You could have taken the settlement. We offered you more than you were entitled to. I was entitled to equal treatment, not charity. And now you have it. Plus the satisfaction of destroying everyone in the process. I didn't destroy anyone. I revealed truths you didn't want to see. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll never forgive you for this. I know. He hung up. Lydia sent a letter. Handwritten, not email. Like that made it more significant. It said, I understand why you did what you did. I even understand why you felt you had to go to trial instead of accepting our offers. But I can't have you in my life anymore. The lawsuit destroyed my business. We couldn't launch without the full capital Dad intended us to have. It destroyed my relationship with Nathan, who blames me for telling Dad about the business in the first place. It destroyed my memories of both our parents. I know you think you were fighting for justice, but all I see is someone who chose revenge over family. I hope it was worth it. I read the letter 3 times. Then I filed it away with all the other documents from the case. Was it worth it? I have money now, significant money, equal to what my siblings have. I can buy whatever I want, live wherever I want, never work again if I choose. But I can't talk to my family. Can't share holidays or memories or the normal rhythms of sibling relationships. Can't call Nathan when I need advice or Lydia when I need to laugh. I have justice, but I'm alone with it. I moved to Seattle. Fresh start, new city. I bought a small house with a yard. I planted roses using my mother's seeds, the ones my father gave me as inheritance. They're growing well, thriving even, but they're mine now. Not because someone gave me permission to tend them, not because I earned them through service, but because I fought for the right to own what I was only meant to maintain. Sometimes I wonder what my mother would think, if she'd be proud that I fought for her intentions, or disappointed that I destroyed the family in the process. Sometimes I wonder what my father thought in those final weeks, signing documents that would cut me out. If he felt justified, if he felt conflicted, if he thought about the woman administering his medications and knew he was betraying her. Mostly I wonder if I made the right choice. The garden is beautiful. The roses bloom every spring, red and white and yellow. I tend them carefully, following my mother's notes, using her tools. But I tend them alone. No siblings visiting to admire them. No family gatherings on the patio. No children running through the garden while adults laugh over wine. Just me and the roses and the inheritance I fought for. Justice tastes like silence. Like roses that bloom for no one but yourself. Like winning a battle and losing the war. Like discovering that being valued equally means standing alone. I keep the garden tools in a shed, just like my father kept them. But I use them now. I own them. I own everything I fought for. And some days, I'm not sure if that's triumph or tragedy. Some days, I think it's both.